Okay, so think about this. What secrets might be hiding in just, our everyday text messages?
It's a strange thought, isn't it?
Yeah. Could those quick chats, the ones we barely think about, actually hold the key to, like, chilling secrets? Or maybe be the thing that blows up a big investigation?
Or even bring down public figures. Sounds almost like a movie plot.
Right. But that's exactly what we're digging into today on the deep dive. Real life, really shocking events where the truth wasn't in some big confession. No, it was buried in just typing words on a screen.
And what's so compelling is how these texts, which feel so temporary, can actually lock down a moment. They show you the raw thoughts, the emotions someone might never say out loud.
Unfiltered?
Exactly. And these digital breadcrumbs, they often become, well, absolutely crucial evidence. They give you this immediate raw look into really complex situations.
Just think how much of our lives happens in texts now. Seriously. Private thoughts, blowing off steam.
Cries for help even.
Yeah, even desperate pleas. And we hardly ever consider the power packed into those little messages, do we? Not until they're suddenly dragged out into the open. So we're going to look at some cases where that's precisely what occurred. Private texts with massive, sometimes devastating public fallouts. Let's start with one that, on the surface, seemed almost bizarrely straightforward, but took a really dark turn. And it all hinged on what was texted before the event. I'm talking about Aaron Patterson and those mushrooms.
Ah, yes, the Aaron Patterson case. It grabs you immediately because of the tragic outcome. 3 deaths after what just looked like a normal family lunch.
Seems so innocent.
But as the investigation unfolded, the timeline, the stuff that happened before that meal became really important. And texts, digital messages were key to understanding that lead up.
Exactly. So Aaron Patterson invites her ex-in-laws over for lunch. Seems fine. Maybe a bit awkward, but fine.
A bridge building attempt, perhaps, or so it might seem.
But then the unthinkable. 3 people die. And suddenly, the investigation shifts. It's not just about the food anymore, is it? It's about the messages sent in the weeks and days right before that lunch.
And what those alleged texts revealed, well, it painted a very different picture from just a simple family meal. Her ex-husband, Simon Patterson, apparently got a whole string of messages from Aaron that were, well, let's just say not friendly.
Not friendly is putting it mildly. From the descriptions, they were called angry, blaming, just full of resentment.
Yeah, filled with accusations. Reports said she texted him things like he totally ruined her life. Really intense stuff.
And other messages hinted at betrayal, feeling controlled, years of anger just sort of boiling over. It doesn't sound like 2 people who just amicably split,
No, not at all. I mean, breakups are tough. There's sadness, sure. But these reported texts, they suggested something much more volatile, rage maybe, not just heartbreak.
The language was apparently really strong. Persistent negativity.
Right. And that intensity, that anger, that's something investigators would definitely zero in on when trying to figure out the context around, the actual tragedy.
That contrast is stark, isn't it?
Yeah.
A polite lunch invite on one hand, and these furious texts just before it.
It really shows how texts can capture those raw emotions, the ones we filter in person, unfiltered by social niceties.
It makes you realize motive isn't always obvious from just watching someone's actions. Sometimes it's spelled out. Right there in the messages.
Word for word.
Okay, let's pivot a bit. A totally different scene now. Fame, sports, public image versus private messages that surfaced unexpectedly. We need to talk about NFL star Brett Favre and sports reporter Jen Sturger. Less about the touchdowns, more about the texts.
Yeah, this case is a really clear example of how even people living completely in the public eye, people constantly scrutinized, still leave these digital trails, and those trails can show a very, very different reality.
So back in 2008, Brett Favre, huge name in football, obviously, he apparently started sending Jen Sturger voicemails and texts she didn't ask for.
That's right.
Unsolicited.
And these weren't just like, hey, how's it going? Texts, were they?
No, reports describe them as explicit and repetitive. And crucially, she didn't want them. They were unwanted advances.
The impact on Jen Sturger must have been immense.
Oh, absolutely. Suddenly she's dragged into this huge media storm, this scandal. But she's the one dealing with all the fallout, the unwanted attention, the judgment.
It affected her career, right? Or mental.
Profoundly. Her career, her well-being, even her sense of safety. And remember, this was 2008, kind of before the huge social media explosion we have now.
Good point.
It just underlines how even earlier forms of digital communication could be misused, could be weaponized, and the damage lasts no matter the platform.
The NFL investigated, but the findings weren't really made public in detail, were they?
Not entirely, no, but what really sticks out, I think, is years later, Jen Sturger spoke out on a documentary. She talked about the deep, lasting impact those texts had on her.
And that shifted the focus, didn't it? Completely. It wasn't just another celebrity scandal anymore. It became about, power imbalances, the pressure on people, especially women, to stay quiet about harassment, and the courage it takes to finally speak up.
And the texts were the proof.
Undeniable evidence. They showed a pattern of behavior with real human consequences. It wasn't just words floating in cyberspace.
A stark reminder. What seems like a private digital exchange can blow up publicly and cause real harm. Okay, let's move to another case, one that really gripped everyone globally and ended so tragically. Brian Laundrie and Gabby Petito. Before all the searching and the media frenzy, we need to look at their texts.
This one is particularly heartbreaking, I think, because you see that stark contrast again, the image they put out there, especially online, versus the reality hidden in their private messages.
Right, they look like this perfect young couple, adventurous, living the dream on this cross-country road trip, all his Instagram photos.
That whole hashtag van life aesthetic seemed idyllic.
But then investigators got hold of their texts, and the picture changed drastically.
What emerged was, often very short replies, clipped messages, abrupt changes in tone, seemingly out of nowhere.
And Gabby apologizing a lot, right? For things that seemed minor.
Yes, analysts pointed that out. This pattern of her frequently saying sorry, sometimes for really small things, it's sometimes called apology stacking in relationships with coercive control.
Yeah.
One partner takes the blame constantly just to keep the peace.
Wow. And beyond the apologies.
The texts also suggested patterns of controlling behavior from Brian, trying to dictate their travel apparently, and monitoring her calls or texts with other people.
Even controlling what she posted on her own social media.
Reportedly, yes.
Yeah.
Influencing what she shared about their trip, their life.
At first glance, maybe you dismiss it. Just relationship friction, couples arguing.
Sure, that's possible. But as more messages came out and were analyzed together, a more disturbing pattern started to form. It wasn't just tension. The texts seemed to hint more and more at manipulation, and maybe fear, or at least anxiety, in Gabby's messages.
It became clearer over time.
Experts who looked at the communication drew parallels. They compared the dynamic to what you often see in domestic violence cases.
Like a slow escalation.
Exactly. Subtle, quiet escalations of control, of emotional manipulation, things that often happen before abuse becomes more obvious or physical. In this case, those texts provided this crucial, though incredibly sad, window. They showed a relationship that was much, much more troubled than the happy pictures suggested.
It's chilling how those little digital pieces added up to reveal that hidden, ultimately devastating truth. Okay, one last case to discuss. This one involves a real breach of trust, someone in authority. Before we get to the uniform in the court case, let's look at the messages that exposed a police officer named Jordan Weston.
This case is a powerful example of that disconnect, that potential gulf between someone's public role and their private actions, revealed through texts. Jordan Weston was a police officer, a position of trust, of authority.
Someone meant to protect people.
Precisely. But behind closed doors, or rather behind the screen, his text messages to his partner allegedly showed something deeply disturbing.
What kind of things are we talking about?
Reports say the texts were filled with threats, belittling language, mocking her, trying to control her movements, who she saw, what she did. It wasn't just arguing, it sounded like clear abuse of power channeled through text.
And he used his job.
Allegedly, yes. The texts apparently showed him leveraging his authority, reportedly boasting that nobody would believe her if she spoke out against a cop, directly threatening to ruin her life if she tried.
That's terrifying.
And the fact it was written down, preserved digitally, made it undeniable. It wasn't just his word against hers, which can be so difficult in cases involving authority figures. The threats were right there.
What strikes me is that the initial documented abuse wasn't physical. It was written, aggressive, calculated words, using his badge, essentially, to intimidate via text.
Yes, a calculated use of psychological and emotional control, leveraging his position. But here's the twist, I suppose. The very format he used, digital text, became his undoing. Because when those texts were shown in court, They were concrete evidence. Screenshots. You can't easily argue with that. It was an undeniable record of his threats, his controlling behavior.
His own words used against him.
Exactly. The legal system he was part of ultimately used his typed messages to hold him accountable.
It's a powerful point, isn't it? Our digital footprint creates this record. It can hold anyone accountable, no matter their job or status. So, wrapping this up, looking back at all these cases, Aaron Patterson, Brett Favre, Gabby and Brian, Jordan Weston. It's clear, isn't it? Text messages, the things we type out so casually, thinking they're private, maybe unimportant.
They can suddenly become incredibly significant. They can unlock these hidden truths, expose secrets, and have massive real-world consequences.
Yeah, it wasn't just that the text recorded what happened. In these situations, they actively uncovered hidden parts of people's lives, their relationships, their real intentions, things that might have stayed buried otherwise.
Absolutely. The digital trail became the pathway to the truth.
Which really makes you think, doesn't it? For all of us listening, what secrets might be sitting there in your message history? It's a bit unsettling.
It is. And in this world where everything is so connected, so digital, who else might be seeing or could potentially see these exchanges we think are just between two people?
It leaves you with a pretty big question, I think.
Yeah.
About the nature of all this digital communication we rely on now.
Definitely. What does it mean for truth? For accountability? For all the hidden stories that might just be waiting in the data streams we create every single day? Something powerful to consider about our own digital lives, for sure.